All praise be to Ea. Having more fun than Enlil allows human beings to have. This is Brothers and Serpent podcast for the second time for the third segment. This is like a time warp for you guys because you don't know, except that I'm telling you now, that we actually did this segment once already and we lost it. Probably because I was talking shit about fairies. And they got mad. So...
I'm now mad. We were literally halfway through the segment and the computer just shut off.
Yep.
So
I must have said something wrong and made them mad. Okay. So, a midwife story. This story is there's a lot of stories like this about midwives who have these strange encounters. They're asked to come and help a fairy baby be born. Okay, so a midwife story. A country nurse was requested by a strange man on horseback to go with him to exercise her profession, and she went with him to a castle she did not know. When the baby was born, every woman in the place where the event happened put her finger into a basin of water and rubbed her eyes. So the nurse put her finger in and rubbed it on one of her eyes. She went home and thought no more about it. But one day she was at the fair and she saw some of the same women who were in the castle when the baby was born, though, as she noticed, she could only see them with the one eye that she had wet with the water from the basin. The nurse spoke to the women, and they wanted to know how she recognized them, and she, in reply, said it was with the one eye, and she asked, "How is the baby?" "The baby is well," said one of the fairy women, "and what eye do you see us with?" With the left eye," answered the nurse. And then the fairy woman blew her breath against the nurse's left eye and said, "You'll never see us again." And the nurse was always blind in her left eye after that.
that is a crazy,
Yeah.
cool story. What is the deal with blowing in the eye?
Yeah, I don't know. Let us now turn to the Ross's Point country, which, as we have already said, is one of the very famous places for seeing the gentry, or as educated Irish seers who make pilgrimages thither call them, the Sidhe. I have been told by more than one such seer that there on the hills and greenlands, which is a great stretch of open country, treeless and grass-grown, and on the strand at Lower Ross's Point, called Wren Point by the country folk, these beings can be seen and their wonderful music heard, and a well-known Irish artist has shown me many drawings and paintings in oil of these Sidhe people, as he has often beheld them at those places and elsewhere in Ireland. They are described as a race of majestic appearance and marvelous beauty, in form human yet in nature divine. The highest order of them seems to be a race of beings evolved to a superhuman plane of existence, such as the ancients called gods, lowercase g god there. And with this opinion, strange as it may seem in this age, all of the educated Irish seers with whom I have been privileged to talk agree, though they go further, and say that these highest Sidhe races still inhabiting Ireland are the ever-young, immortal divine race known to the ancient men of Erin as the Tuatha De Danann, which is the Tuatha De Danann, if I'm saying that correctly, is the supposedly almost divine superhuman race that when men came to the island of Ireland, they defeated them in this great war. And the Tuatha were, like, in the terms of surrender, the Tuatha had to go below ground and men would live above ground. So that was they've kind of, I don't know if those things are connected, if the fairies are connected to them or not, but they often will ascribe them to being those people. That it's weird to me because I'm like, wait a minute, if they're immortal and badass, how did the men defeat them and force them underground?
Well, there are ways. Like
There are ways.
No, but like and I'm thinking of like sort of like fairy tales. There's always like these weird ways you can trick the powerful being or whatever, because they've got other issues like with things that are sort of
Achilles
normal.
Heels is what you're saying. Yeah.
They got things that are like normal to humans are like really difficult or not.
Yeah, like their problems with iron for one.
Yeah. And there's just, I don't know, I can't think of any examples, but there's like interesting ways to trick them because they're not good at certain things that humans are or something like that.
Yeah.
So maybe they were.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I do know that their whole problem with they hate iron. Like the story of the fairy queen that could not steal the baby because it had the little tiny steel pin on it, but they saw it as a giant beam across its chest, and so they couldn't lift it.
Yeah.
They have this serious problem with iron. And they call it cold iron. Bring no item of cold iron when you come to meet the fae.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's the other thing, like making deals with them. You can often trick them, like, like the way, like, you trick the demon into making the deal, you know?
Yeah.
For the pick of destiny.
Yeah. We challenge you to a rock off.
You're gonna gargle mayonnaise.
The demon code prevents me from denying a rock off challenge. The demon code. Okay. So there's this whole question and answer series here, and I'm going to read a little bit of these. Okay, question. By the inner world, do you mean the Celtic otherworld? Answer. Yes, though there are many other worlds. The Tir na Nog of the ancient Irish, in which the races of the Sidhe exist, may be described as a radiant archetype of this world, though this definition does not at all express its psychic nature. In Tir na Nog, one sees nothing save harmony and beautiful forms. There are other worlds in which we can see horrible shapes. So, the whole Celtic otherworld, the warp and the woof, the idea of how they're interwoven together is what he's talking about here. But he's saying that there are many warp and woof weaves in this, all stacked on top of each other.
Yeah.
Right. So, let's see. There's some other questions here. Okay. Do you in any way classify the Sidhe races to which you refer? Answer. The beings whom I call the Sidhe I divide, as I have seen them, into two great classes, those which are shining and those which are opalescent and seem lit up by a light within themselves. The shining beings appear to be lower in the hierarchies, and the opalescent beings are more rarely seen and appear to hold the positions of great chiefs or princes among the tribes of Dana. Under what state and condition and where have you seen such beings? Answer. I have seen them most frequently after being away from a city or town for a few days. The whole west coast of Ireland from Donegal to Kerry seems charged with a magical power, and I find it easiest to see while I am there. I have always found it comparatively easy to see visions while at ancient monuments like Newgrange, because I think such places are naturally charged with psychical forces, and were for that reason made use of long ago as sacred places. I usually find it possible to throw myself into the mood of seeing, but sometimes visions have forced themselves upon me. Okay. Then he gives a description of the shining beings, that they are, let's see, the opalescent beings, that they are dazzling in light, that they have this, that they're half transparent. Throughout the body ran a radiant electrical fire to which the heart seemed the center, around the head of this being and through its waving luminous hair, which was blown about the body like living strands of gold. There appeared flaming wing-like auras. From the being itself, light seemed to stream outwards in every direction, and the effect left on me after the vision was one of extraordinary lightness, joyousness, and ecstasy. And like we were talking about the last time we recorded this segment, that's very much like what Enoch or Ezekiel or these other ancient prophets have said about angels, right?
Except that I don't know, Enoch's description of like when he goes with the angels, like they're like the shining ones. They sort of are just bright, or they glow, or something.
Right.
But then they bring him to the Most High.
Right, and that
whatever.
one's too bright to even look at.
He's so bright he can't even look at it. But it's also, he's like scared to death. He doesn't have a feeling of lightness and joy.
Right.
So it's
right. That's true.
Maybe this person is worried about offending them, like you were saying in the last time.
Oh, it was great. I felt joyous and ecstasy. Really, he's going, hell no. See, this is why the computer shut off last time. We can't offend these beings, okay?
I know I was getting upset because I skipped my opportunity to do the same joke I did before about the beings in the dark places that are all types of horrible things. Last time we did this segment, I was like, that reminds me of some of the places Stephen King talks about, like in the Dark Tower series, where you're just like, hell no.
Question. You speak of the opalescent beings as great beings. What stature do you assign to them and to the shining beings? Answer. The opalescent beings seem to be about 14 feet in stature, though I do not know why I attribute to them such a definite height, since I had nothing to compare them with, but I have always considered them as much taller than our race. The shining beings seem to be about our own stature, or just a little taller. Peasant and other Irish seers do not usually speak of the Sidhe as being little, but as being tall. An old schoolmaster in the west of Ireland described them to me from his own visions as tall, beautiful people, and he used some Gaelic words, which I took as meaning that they were shining with every color. Okay. Question. Do the two orders of Sidhe beings inhabit the same world? Answer. The shining beings belong to the mid-world, while the opalescent beings belong to the heaven world. There are 3 great worlds which we can see while we are still in this body. The earth, the mid-world, and the heaven world. Okay.
Mid-world.
Mid-world.
That's also in Stephen King.
That's right.
Dark Tower.
A stone wall overthrown by a fairy agency. Nothing is more certain than that there are fairies. The old folks always thought of them as the fallen angels. At the back of this house, the fairies had their pass or road. My neighbor started to build a cowshed. In one wall, a bunting on the pass was thrown down twice, and nothing but the fairies ever did it. The third time the wall was built, it stayed up. So you can see that the whole 3 times built thing comes from the fairy lore as well.
Yep.
Monty Python's genius. All right. Let's see. Personal opinions. Okay, the fairies of any one race are the people of the preceding race. So the Formors for the Firbolgs, the Firbolgs for the Danans, and the Danans for us. So if you take that backwards, like the human race sees the Tuatha Dé Danann as the Fae. The Tuatha Dé Danann saw the Firbolgs, which they defeated as the Fae. The Firbolgs saw the Formors, which they defeated as the Fae, or those in the spirit realm, the ones banished to the mid-world.
I wonder if that's like sort of connected to the what's the Indian dang it, can't think of the word. We talk about it all the time.
What?
The Yuga cycles.
Oh yeah. Oh, okay. Like they're the
Like you got the golden
they're
age of
ascended?
these enlightened ascended
yeah.
beings, and then these come and defeat, quote unquote, defeat them.
so the Tuatha Dé Danann would have been from the previous Silver Age, and the humans from the Kali defeated them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Defeated them. It's not like they actually had a war. It was like this was the
fall.
the natural movement of the fall of the consciousness of the beings of the time.
Yeah.
And so the older, like the higher ascended, like you were saying, ascended beings were from the higher.
Yeah, I got you. That's interesting.
And so that their consciousnesses or their spirits are still there in the world, but they won't come back into power, quote unquote, until that cycle repeats.
That's very interesting, especially the way that. Okay, yeah, that's
Because like
cool.
that's why we're in the Iron Age or whatever. So we've got this
Kali,
cold
yeah.
iron.
Yeah, they don't like cold iron. That's
Right.
Wow, that's very interesting.
Good thing we did this segment again.
That's right. Please don't hurt us, fairies. The Death Coach.
Maybe they wanted us to figure it out, which is why they killed the computer.
No, yeah, that could be it.
Yeah.
Just make sure you don't go. If you wake up tomorrow and you're blind in your left eye, you know.
I'm throwing sugar over my left shoulder right now.
The next tale the mother told was about the Death Coach, which used to pass by the very house we were in. Every night until after her daughter was born, she used to rise up on her elbow in bed to listen to the Death Coach passing by. Now, see how they call it the Death Coach, but it's really when you get through the story, you realize it's like a spirit coach. Really, it's not necessarily a death coach.
Yeah.
There's no death associated with it.
Except that they associate it with the underworld.
Right.
Yeah.
It passed by about midnight, and she could hear the rushing, the trampling of the horses, and the most beautiful singing, just like fairy music, but she could not understand the words. Once or twice she was brave enough to open the door and look out as the coach passed, but she could never see a thing, though there was the noise and the singing. One time a man had to wait on the roadside to let the horses go by, and he could hear their passing very clearly, but he couldn't see a one of them. Okay, and then the author says, when we got home, Dr. Hyde, who was the guy he was going around with, told me that the fairies of the region are rarely seen. The people usually say that they hear or feel them only. Okay, the good people and Mr. Gilleran. After the mother had testified, the daughter, who was quite of the younger generation, gave her own opinion. She said that the good people live in the forts, and by this they mean, but when they say forts, he's italicizing that. What he means is these Bronze Age, what standard model archaeologists consider to be Bronze Age forts that are all over Ireland. Okay. They often take the men and women or youths who pass by the forts after sunset, and take, again, is italicized, meaning that these people vanish. So if you're walking after sunset past one of these ancient Bronze Age forts, the fairy take you, and you 411. Okay. Mr. Gilleran, who died not long ago, once saw certain dead friends and recognized among them those who were believed to have been taken and those who died naturally, and that he saw them again when he was on his deathbed. So he saw both people who had disappeared while out in the fields and people who died naturally together with the fairy in the fields near the forts, is what that story is saying. So this is why they associate
with death in the underworld.
With the underworld in some way or another. Yeah. So we have here, as in so many other accounts, a clear connection between the realm of the dead and the fairyland. Okay, a girl recovered from fairy. One day, just before sunset in midsummer, I and a boy, then my brother and cousin and myself, were gathering bilberries up by the rocks at the back of here when all at once we heard music. So here you have people picking berries in the middle of nowhere. Okay. About to 411.
Hell no. No, no, no. Yeah, to the no.
That's right. We heard music. We hurried around the rocks, and there we were within a few hundred feet of 6 or 8 of the gentle folk. And they danced. And when they saw us, a little woman, dressed all in red, came running out of them towards us, and she struck my cousin across the face with what seemed to be a green rush. We ran for home as hard as we could, and when my cousin reached the house, she fell dead. Father saddled a horse and went for Father Ryan, so their dad went for the priest. When Father Ryan arrived, he put a stole about his neck and began praying over my cousin and reading psalms and striking her with the stole, and in that way he brought her back. He said if she had not caught hold of my brother, she would have been taken forever. That she would have disappeared completely.
It's weird, like there's the other story where they see him and the person runs up and like slashes his face or her face, whichever.
Yeah, exactly. And then there are all those 401 stories where people appear with slashes all down their bodies.
Oh.
You know, they find the person and they've got these incredible, what they call abrasions all down their bodies or whatever. Like, this is the same deal.
If anybody ever asks you, like, hey, you want to go pick berries in the boulder field? You're like, hell to the no.
That's right. Hell no. The gentle folk. The gentle folk are not earthly people. They are a people with a nature of their own. Even in the water, there are men and women of the same character. Others have caves in the rocks, and in them they have their own rooms and apartments. These races were terribly plentiful 100 years ago, which would be the 1800s, and they'll come back again. My father lived 2 miles from here, where there were plenty of the gentle folk. In olden times, they used to take young folks and keep them and draw all of the life out of their bodies. Nobody could ever tell their nature exactly. So, again, like the reason they call them the gentle folk or the gentry, right? These names are because they don't want to offend them. Like, to offend the fairy is usually either deadly or brings incredible misfortune. So they call them the good folk or the gentle folk, even though often they're not any of those things.
Are you one of the nasty folk?
Dead. That's right. He did. The fairies and the weaver. Ned Judge of Sophist Bridge was a weaver. Every night after he went to bed, the weaving started of itself, and when he arose in the morning, he would find the dressing which had been made ready for weaving so broken and entangled that it took him hours to put it right. Yet with all this drawback, he got no poorer, because the fairies left him plenty of household necessaries, and whenever he sold a web of cloth, he always received thrice the amount he bargained for. So they come in and completely screw everything up, but they gave him a bunch of household stuff that he didn't have to purchase, and then whenever he got to sell his thing after he finally was able to make it, even though they were screwing it up, he got 3 times the amount he was going to try to get for it.
They're like spirit weaving something in it. In our realm, it totally destroys it, but in their realm, they're like making their badass robes and stuff.
Yeah. That's right.
That's crazy.
Food offerings to place fairies. It was very usual formerly, and the practice is not yet completely given up, to place a bed, some other furniture, and plenty of food in a newly constructed dwelling the night before the time fixed for moving into it. And if the food is not consumed and the crumbs swept up by the door in the morning, the house cannot be safely occupied. I know of 2 houses now that have never been occupied because the fairies did not show their willingness and goodwill by taking food so offered to them.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So you imagine that. You build your whole house, and the night before you move, or the day before you move in, you put in some furniture, and you set out a bunch of food. And if the fairies did not take the food, that you cannot live in the house.
Yeah, that can only be a custom from a people that are not really just making crap up. Like...
Right. Why would you leave the house? That's a big deal.
Yeah.
To leave a house that you built. That's a big deal.
Yeah. But it also reminds me of the whole Santa Claus thing that we have here, which is a pagan
Yeah, many pieces of it come from the Fae legends.
Yeah. So you got to put out the cookies milk, and then
Right.
he comes down there,
And
and then he leaves you gifts or
And
whatever.
he is magically able to travel through the sky and come
Yeah.
down every chimney and leave gifts.
Yeah. And then only if you're good or bad.
Right. He knows who's naughty or nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And leave him some food. Okay. Evidence from Loch Gur, County Limerick. One of the most interesting parts of Ireland for the archaeologist and for the folklorist alike is the territory immediately surrounding Loch Gur, County Limerick, shut in for the most part from the outer world by a circle of low-lying hills on whose summits fairy goddesses yet dwell invisibly. This region, famous for its numerous and well-preserved cromlechs, dolmens, menhirs, and tumuli are like piles of... they're usually like tells, mounds of stone that used to be something, but nobody can tell what they are now. And for the rare folk traditions current among its peasantry, has long been popularly regarded as a sort of otherworld preserve haunted by fairy beings who dwell both in its waters and on its land. There seems to be no reasonable doubt that in pre-Christian times, the Loch Gur country was a very sacred spot for a mystic center of pilgrimages and for the celebration of Celtic religious rites, including those of initiation. The loch is still enchanted, but once in 7 years the spell passes off of it, and then it appears like dry land to anyone that is fortunate enough to behold this. At such a time of disenchantment, a tree, and that's with a capital T, a tree is seen growing up to the lake bottom, a tree like the strange world tree of Scandinavian myth. The tree is covered with a green cloth, and under it sits the lake's guardian, a woman who is knitting. The peasantry about Loch Gur still believe that beneath its waters there is one of the chief entrances in Ireland to Tir na Nog, the land of youth or the fairy realm.
That reminds me of the little winemaking lady at the edge of the, like on the other side of the mountain in the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Yeah.
And she has a gate and
Yeah.
a door.
Yeah.
And has to get in there to get information.
Why do you
It's like,
close your gate against me, woman? Because you looked at I looked over, my friend is dead. There are 2 hills near Loch Gur upon whose summits sacrifices and sacred rites used to be celebrated according to living tradition. One about 3 miles southwest of the lake is called Knock Ein, or Aini, Ane or Ane being the name of an ancient Irish goddess derived from An, bright.
Yep.
Anu.
Sumerian,
Ane.
Anu.
Inanna. The highest hill on the lake shores is called Knock Fennel, or the hill of the goddess Fennel, from Finnin or Finnier or Finine, a form of Fin, or Fin, which means white. The peasantry of the region call Aine or Anu one of the good people, and they say that Fennel, apparently her sister goddess or a variant, live upon the top of the Knock. Knock Fennel. So that one I wanted to read, even though it's confusing with all the different name types and everything, because of the connection with Sumerian mythology and the ancient gods. They're like Anu, Ane, Aine, Inanna, Fennel, Fen, Fiend.
It's like less interesting to think that, you know, the Sumerians, or that there was a lost civilization that predates the Sumerians that circumnavigated the globe and spread their ideas around, than it is to think that there's that spirit realm and whatever all that weird stuff is that
Is still
independently,
there.
it's still there and independently influence these different
Yes. I see what
races
you're
of
saying.
people.
Yeah.
Like-
that there's the common influence is actually from this spirit realm rather
Right.
than some ancient lost civilization.
Yeah.
Or it could be both.
It could be both.
Yeah.
You know, the ancient lost civilization could have
The
been.
Tuatha De Danann are supposedly an ancient lost civilization, a piece of one that were sent there. Like the whole legend of them we'll have to get into on some other show because that's a giant rabbit hole. But they were basically... What's up?
Go ahead.
They were basically sent there to the land of Ireland as a piece of a civilization that existed elsewhere in the world that was global in scope. They were sent there to conquer it of the Fear Nanog or whatever the older people were.
Yeah.
It's almost like the Greek Titans being conquered by the later pantheon of Zeus and his ilk.
Yeah. Have you read the Finn word yet?
Yeah, Finn, yeah. As in Phoenician.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Before,
Phoenicians. And they, like, basically they went all over the place, and they have all.
And nobody can figure out where the hell they were
Yeah,
from.
no, we don't know where they were from or who they,
Yeah.
who they actually were, but we just have
That article that you read, that's their boat. It was one of their boats.
Yeah, yeah.
The
we
fiend.
have their written language,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I
And
don't know, it's
there's standard model ideas that they came from Mycenae or whatever, but nobody really knows.
yeah,
Nobody actually knows.
it's just crazy that. Well, I mean, I guess it's not that crazy if you're thinking of the idea that sea levels are totally different.
Yeah.
Like they could, wherever they were from, could just be
Yeah.
underwater. So
Yeah.
anyway, Finn.
Fin.
Fine.
It's a thing that a fish has.
Take el mine.
A collective vision of spiritual beings. Some few weeks before Christmas 1910 at midnight on a very dark night, I and another young man who, like myself, was then about 23 years of age, were on horseback on our way home from Limerick. While near Listowel, we had noticed a light about half a mile ahead. At first, it seemed to be no more than a light in some house, but as we came nearer to it, and it was passing out of our direct line of vision, we saw that it was moving up and down and to and fro, diminishing to a spark and then expanding into a yellow, luminous flame. Before we came to Listowel, we noticed two lights about 100 yards to our right, resembling the light seen at first. Suddenly, each of these lights expanded into the same sort of yellow, luminous flame, about 6 feet high by 4 feet broad. In the midst of each flame, we saw a radiant being having human form. Presently, the lights moved towards one another and made contact, whereupon the two beings in them were seen to be walking side by side. The beings' bodies were formed of a pure, dazzling radiance, white like the radiance of the sun and much brighter than the yellow light or aura surrounding them. So dazzling was the radiance, like a halo round their heads, that we could not distinguish the countenance of the beings. We could only distinguish the general shape of their bodies, though their heads were very clearly outlined because of this halo-like radiance, which was the brightest light about them, seemed to radiate from or rest upon the head of each being. As we traveled on, a house intervened between us and the lights, and we saw no more of them. It was the first time we had ever seen such phenomena, and in our hurry to get home, we were not wise enough to stop and make further examination. But ever since that night, I have frequently seen, both in Ireland and in England, similar lights with spiritual beings in them.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That has a lot of similarities to, a lot of the, Middle Eastern
Yeah, depictions of these beings.
of seeing a being like,
and even like Native American rock art, where you see the halo around the head.
Yeah, yeah.
These and there's
Yeah,
all these
good point.
lines coming out from them like they're shining.
yeah.
Okay, now he's in Scotland. The proud angel. Okay, so this story I'm about to read is found in every one of these Celtic countries, and it's told in every one of them about when they ask, well, where do you think these beings came from? This story is similar in almost all aspects, except for little tiny details. The story that they tell about where they think these fairies came from, except for the whole Tuatha De Danann thing, but they think that's part of it. But anyway, here we go. The proud angel, those are capitalized. So in other words, we're talking about Lucifer here. Fomented a rebellion amongst the angels of heaven, where he had been a leading light. He declared that he would go and found a kingdom of his own for himself. When going out at the door of heaven, the proud angel brought prickly lightning and biting lightning out of the doorstep with his heels. Many angels followed him, so many that at last the Son, the Son of God, called out, "Father, the city is being emptied." Whereupon the Father ordered that the gates of heaven and the gates of hell should be closed. This was instantly done. And those who were in, those who were out, while the hosts who had left heaven and had not yet reached hell flew into the holes of the earth like the stormy petrels. These are the fairy folk, ever since doomed to live under the ground. So you imagine
ones
this
that didn't make it into
right?
the
The
gates
stream of
hell.
angels coming out following Lucifer. The ones that were like when the gates were ordered shut,
Yeah.
bam, they slammed shut. And there were ones that were in hell, ones that were in heaven, and the ones in between. And those are the fae.
Wow. So where are these other stories that were like? You're saying there's a bunch of stories that are similar.
Yeah, that story is told in every. We've just gotten to Scotland. He's moved from Ireland into Scotland, and I just marked that one as to stand for every because you find it in every single one of the islands.
Oh, okay.
That's all I was saying.
Okay.
Here's another part. On certain nights, when their bowers are open and their lamps are lit, and the song and the dance are moving merrily, the fae may be heard singing lightheartedly. Not of the seed of Adam are we, nor is Abraham our father, but of the seed of the proud angel driven forth from heaven. So they're not men, not of the seed of Adam.
Yeah.
I find that fascinating. Sometimes the fairies helped human beings with their work, coming in at night to finish the spinning or the housework, or to thresh the farmer's corn or fan his grain. On such occasions, they must not be molested or interfered with, even in gratitude. If presented with a garment, they will go away and work no more. This method of getting rid of them is often resorted to, as it is not always easy to find work for them to do. And you might recognize this from Harry Potter.
Yeah, give them clothes.
Give the house elf clothes and they leave.
Yeah.
That's how you fire them, basically. But in this sense, it's more like there are lots of stories about, and even this comes from the Arabic legends too. Like you get a demon servant, and it does everything that you want, and it does it so quickly, and then but then it begins to get pissed. Like, give me work to do, right? And if you can't find work for them, they start to screw everything up. And people become desperate to find something for them to do, and they always find these like endless tasks, right? Like counting the grains of sand on the beach, or just something that's impossible. Trying to like uncurl like curly hair or something like that. They pull it out and then it goes back in. They pull it out and it goes back in. And they pull it out and you send them in this like revolving endless task in order to keep them from destroying everything because they don't have anything to do.
Build pyramids.
Right. And then they'll cover the whole world in pyramids and be like, give me something to do. Because it only takes them a second to do it. It's impossible to satisfy their need for work. Sometimes a man, hearing the merry music and seeing the wonderful light within, would be tempted to go and join them, but woe to him if he omitted to leave a piece of iron at the door upon entering, for the cunning fairies would close the door and the man would find no egress. There he would dance for years, but to him the years were as one day, while his wife and family mourned him as dead. So this kind of connects to legends where if you're not careful, like the whole Rip Van Winkle deal, you go in and you dance with him for one night, and when you come back, everyone you knew is dead, and it's been generations, right?
But what was the part about the iron at the door? I was thinking about something
Leave
else.
iron at the door so that you can get out because they can't close it.
Oh.
But if you don't leave iron at the door, they'll shut the door, and then there will be no door in your eyes. You will not be able to find the exit. The flint arrowheads, so much prized by antiquarians, are called in the Highlands Saighe Shi, fairy arrows. And I'm probably butchering that first word. I know how to say the second one, she. They are said to have been thrown by the fairies at the sons and daughters of men. The writer possesses one which was thrown at his own maidservant one night when she went to the peat stack for peat. She was aware of something whizzing through the silent air, passing through her hair, grazing her ear, and falling at her feet. Stooping in the bright moonlight, the girl picked up a fairy arrow. This reminds me of like American Northwest, Pacific Northwest encounters with Bigfoot throwing rocks at people in the night. You hear knocking, and then there's these rocks come whizzing by. Is it Bigfoot or is it the Fae?
Well, since we're comparing things to modern movies and stuff, Game of Thrones, like the Children of the Forest in Game of Thrones made the arrowheads or the spear points out of the obsidian.
Oh, okay.
And I guess
the blood of the earth
in the TV shows, because I don't think the books have even gotten here yet, but they make the Thins, the others, the ones, the beings that can raise the dead and that are fighting men. They make them by. There was a man, one of the first men, and they shoved they did some dance or whatever, something like that, and then they shoved the arrowhead of obsidian into the heart of the guy, and he turns into one of the Thins, and they used him as a weapon to fight the humans.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
Because they were in a battle with the humans, and the humans came and replaced them. So they became, and they were, in the story, they become like fairies, like nobody believes in them anymore.
Yeah.
The Children of the Forest.
There's a lot of stories like that, too, that like when the Fae are having a war with men, they find one man to come, or if they're having a war with each other, the side that can find one man to fight for them, because he can disrupt the whole other force, and the one with one man fighting for them will always win. It's interesting.
So yeah, they turned him into a weapon, and then that weapon ended up almost destroying them too, because he was raising the dead.
Oh yeah,
and just
causing chaos.
Yeah, just everywhere,
going in and on everybody.
Yeah, going in on it.
All right, we're gonna take a quick break. Come back for the last segment about the Fae, the good folk. The gentle ones. The nice people.
Handling all technical difficulties flawlessly with zero mistakes. Brothers of the Serpent Podcast, audio engineer. Doing that for us. Thank you, audio engineer.
Thank you, audio engineer.
All the technical difficulties that the Fae can throw at us.
That's right.
Flawlessly swatted away
Like little tiny fairy arrows. All right.
Don't turn me into a thin.
Aberfoyle, the country of Robert Kirk. My first hunt for fairies in Scotland began at Aberfoyle, and I'm probably butchering that name, where the Highlands and Lowlands meet, and in the very place where Robert Kirk, the minister of Aberfoyle, was taken by them in the year of 1692. The minister spent a large part of his time studying the ways of the good people, and he must have been able to see them, for he was a seventh son. Remember that legend, the seventh son? If you were a seventh son, you were assumed to be a seer, to have supernatural abilities. And a seventh son of a seventh son was serious.
Whoa.
Just serious shit right there. Yeah. Mrs. J. McGregor, who keeps the key to the old churchyard where there is the tomb to Kirk, though many say there is nothing in it but a coffin filled with stones, told me that Kirk was taken into the fairy knoll, which she pointed to just across the little valley in front of us, and is there yet, for the hill is full of caverns, and in them the good people have their homes. And she added that Kirk appeared to a relative of his after he was taken, and said that he was in the power of the good people and he couldn't get away. But, says he, I can be set free if you will have my cousin do what I tell him when I appear again at the christening of my child in the parsonage. According to Mr. Andrew Lang, who reports the same tradition in more detail in his admirable Introduction to the Secret Commonwealth. So, The Secret Commonwealth is a book that Robert Kirk, this minister, wrote about the fairy folk. And it's like this enormous book of all of his studies that he wrote about it. And supposedly he was taken because the Fae were pissed that he let all their secrets out. The cousin was Graham of Duchray, and the thing he was to do was to throw a dagger over Kirk's head. So again, we have the thing of iron, right? So Kirk appears to his cousin at the christening of his child, and this guy, his cousin, is supposed to throw a dagger past Kirk's head. But this cousin was so astonished to see Kirk appear as he said he would that he did not throw the dagger, and so Kirk became a perpetual prisoner of the good people. So that's another common theme, is that people who are taken will sometimes appear to one of their relatives and beg to be set free, and they'll give this very specific, strange instruction that the person has to do. And sometimes the person is able to do it, and sometimes they're not because they're so astonished, and other times they're not because, there's just all kinds of different reasons. So, here we go. In Aberfoyle County, the fairy faith, save for the stories about Kirk, which will probably persist for a long time yet, is rapidly passing. In fact, it is almost forgotten now. Up to 30 years ago, as Mr. Taylor explained, before the railway reached Aberfoyle, belief in fairies was much more common. Nowadays, he says, there is no real fairy lore among the peasants. 50 to 60 years ago, there was. And in his opinion, quote, the fairy people of 300 years ago in Scotland were a distinct race by themselves. They had never been human beings. The belief in them was a survival of paganism, and not at all an outgrowth of Christian belief in angelic hosts. So this guy's actually saying that the whole story about these being fallen angels is a later addition.
Yeah.
And that 300 years ago, no one thought they were angels. They were actually a separate race in and of themselves.
Yeah.
Nope, that's not it either. Okay. So, this is, let's see, the fairy queens. Libations to fairies. The fairy queen who watches over cows is called Gruagach. I have no idea how to say this. In the islands, and she is often seen. In pouring libations to her and her fairies, various kinds of stones, usually with hollows in them, are used. In Lewis, libations are poured to the goddess of the sea called Shoni in order to bring in seaweed. Until modern times in Iona, similar libations were poured to a god corresponding to Neptune. So here, that's Enki. So this is another connection to the Sumerian stuff. Neptune is just the Roman name for Enki, the god of the sea. Okay. In the Highlands, I had the pleasure as well as the great privilege of setting out from Inverness on a bright, crisp September morning in the company with Dr. Alexander Carmichael, the well-known folklorist of Scotland, to study the fairy faith as it exists now in the Highlands round Tomatin, a small country village about 20 miles distant. We departed by an early train, and soon reaching the Tomatin country began our search. Dr. Carmichael for evidence regarding rare and curious Scotch beliefs connected with folk magic, such as blood stopping at a distance and removing motes in the eye at a distance, and I for Highland ghosts and fairies. Our first experience was with an old man whom we met on the road between the railway station and the post office who could speak only Gaelic. Dr. Carmichael talked with him for a while and then asked him about fairies, and he said that there were some living in a cave some way off, but as the distance was rather too far, we decided not to call on them. I just love that story for some reason. Time in Fairyland. People would be 20 years in Fairyland and it wouldn't seem more than a night. A bridegroom who was taken on his wedding day was in Fairyland for many generations and coming back thought it was the next morning. He asked where all the wedding guests were and found only one old woman who remembered the wedding at all. Yeah,
Old Rip Van Winkle.
Yeah. The fatal peat ember. An aged nurse who had fallen fast asleep as she sat by the fire was holding on her knees a newly born babe. The mother, who lay in bed gazing dreamily, was astonished to see their strange little women entering the dwelling. They approached the unconscious child, and she who seemed to be their leader was on the point of lifting it off the nurse's lap, when the third exclaimed, "Oh, let us leave this one her, as we have already taken so many." "So be it," replied the senior of the party in a tone of displeasure. "But when that peat now burning on the hearth shall be consumed, her life will surely come to an end." Then the three little figures passed out of the house, basically. The good wife, recognizing them to be fairies, sprang from her bed and poured over the fire all the water she could find and extinguished the half-burnt ember. This she wrapped carefully in a piece of cloth and deposited it at the very bottom of a large chest, which afterwards she always kept locked, right? Knowing that if it ever burned away, it would, yeah. Years passed, and the babe grew into a beautiful young woman. In the course of time, she was betrothed, and according to custom, not appearing in public at church on the Sunday preceding the day appointed for her marriage, she remained home alone. To amuse herself, she began to search the contents of all the keeping places in the house, and came at last to the chest containing the peat ember. In her haste, the good mother had that day forgotten the key of the chest, which was now in the lock. At the bottom of the chest, the girl found a curious packet containing nothing but a morsel of peat, and this apparently useless thing she tossed away into the fire. When the peat was well kindled, the young girl began to feel very ill, and when the mother returned, she was dying. The open chest and the blazing peat explained the cause of the calamity, and the fairy's prediction was fulfilled.
Entanglement.
That's right. Results of refusing fairy hospitality. Two women were walking towards the point when one of them, hearing a churning noise going on under a hillock, expressed aloud a wish for some buttermilk. No sooner had she spoken than a very small figure of a woman came out with a bowl full and offered it to her. But the thirsty woman, ignorant of fairy customs and the penalty attending their infringement, declined the kind offer of refreshment and immediately found herself a prisoner in the hillock. She was led to an apartment containing a chest full of meal and a great bag of wool, and was told by the fairy that when she had eaten all the meal and spun all the wool, she would be free to return to her home. The prisoner at once set herself to eating and spinning assiduously, but without apparent result, and despairing of completing the task, consulted a very old man of sad countenance, who had long been a captive. He willingly gave her advice, which was to wet her left eye with saliva each morning before she settled down to her task. She followed this advice, and gradually the wool and the meal were exhausted. Then the fairy granted her freedom, but in doing so cursed the old man, and said that she had it in her power to keep him in the hill forever. So again, you had the thing with the eyes and the strange magical, like you're not seeing what's really happening, and I don't know. It's just
but that's
very
the
strange.
other thing, that the saliva in the eye, like there's the biblical story of Jesus, and he like spits in the guy,
Right.
Spits on his
Mixes
hand,
mud, yeah. and makes
Puts it in his
makes
eye
a
and
blind
then he
man
can
see.
see.
Yeah, exactly. Very fey. Okay, this one has some.
fey?
This one has. Are you fey? This one has some names I can't say. Crodkylian. This tale was related by Mr. Neil MacLeod, the Bard of Skye. Colin was a gentleman of Clan Campbell in Perthshire, who was married to a beautiful maiden who the fairies carried off on her marriage day, and on whom they cast a spell which rendered her invisible for a day and a year. She came regularly every day to milk the cows of her sorrowing husband, and sang sweetly to them while she milked, but he never once had the pleasure of beholding her, though he could hear perfectly what she sang. At the expiry of the year, she was, to his great joy, restored to his sight. It's like, what is even the point of that story? You know, like, in terms of superstition, it doesn't tell you anything, and yet these stories are passed down, that this person was made invisible to her husband for a year and a day, but she came to milk the cows every morning, and he could hear her singing, but she was completely invisible. But then after a year and a day, she just reappears. Like, what is the point of this story? This is one of the things I find fascinating about some of these. You don't see, there's no moral. You see what I'm saying? Or maybe what it is that these stories are so old that the moral is completely lost on modern civilization. That there is a moral, but it's for a different culture entirely. That's one of the reasons I find them fascinating, is that we don't tell stories like this without it conveying some information. So when we find them this strange, I think that this gives us insight into a civilization that is completely gone.
Yeah. But there's also the less interesting possibility that just fragments of the story are missing.
Yeah. Or the even more or less interesting is that she just ran off and was with some other dude for a year and a day.
But see, the possible moral to this story is that he never like
he
gave up on her,
he was
because he kept hearing her song.
Right. It's just interesting that, like, they say, you know, because that kind of story would be told that nobody knows that she's going to come back a year and a day later. But they tell you that right at the beginning, that she was just made invisible for a year and a day. Right at the beginning.
But he doesn't know.
Right.
The husband doesn't know.
Yeah.
But he doesn't go get another wife.
Right.
Because he can still hear her song.
Right. It is interesting.
I don't know. Maybe that's...
Nobody knows.
But there are plenty of them that don't have... I mean, you can kind of try to work out a little moral there, but there are plenty of them that don't have that.
What's the moral here? Milk the freaking cows.
Sing while you work.
That's right. Natures of fairies. I believe that fairies exist as a tribe of spirits and appear to us in the form of men and women. People who saw fairies can yet describe them as and they appeared as dressed in green. Now see, this is it. So in Scotland, they're dressed in green. In Ireland, they see them in red. No doubt there are fairies in other countries as well as here. In my experience, there was always a good deal of difference between the fairies and the hosts. Okay, so in this case, I'll explain this. The hosts they see as the fae of the sky. The fairies, or what he's calling the fairies here, are the people of the ground, underneath the ground, in the hills, in the forts. The hosts, in this, when they refer to hosts, they're talking about beings in the sky. The fairies were supposed to be living without material food, whereas the hosts were supposed to be living upon their own booty. Or what that means, I think, is loot.
Yeah.
Generally, the hosts were evil and the fairies good, though I have
bounty,
heard... Yeah. Generally, the hosts were evil and the fairies good, though I have heard that the fairies used to take cattle and leave their old men rolled up in the hides. Think about that. They'd take a cow, but its skin would be there with an ancient fairy rolled up in it. It's weird.
Cattle mutilations.
Yeah. One night, an old witch was heard to say to the fairies outside the fold, "We cannot get anything tonight." The old men who were left behind in the hides of the animals taken usually disappeared very suddenly. I saw two men who used to be lifted by the host. So they tell these stories about people who are just picked up out of the sky. This is where the whole alien abduction thing comes into play. They were lifted by the host, and they would be carried from South Uist as far as Barra Head and as far north as Harris. So they're talking about hundreds of miles here, I think. Sometimes when these men were ordered by the host to kill men on the road, they would kill instead either a horse or a cow, for in that way, so long as an animal was killed, the injunction of the host was fulfilled. So they could show blood on their arrow. So here you have like demands of sacrifice, and the person would shoot a cow and be like, "I totally killed them. See the blood?" And it would trick the hosts into believing that he had done what they asked.
Yeah.
The ferry belt. I heard of an apprentice to a carpenter who was working with his master at the building of a boat, a little distance from his house, and near the sea. He went to work one morning and forgot a certain tool which he needed in the boat building. He returned to his carpenter shed to get it, because you got to bring all your tools to work.
Yeah.
and found the shed filled with fairy men and women. Upon seeing him, they ran away so greatly confused that one of the women forgot her belt, and he picked it up. In a little while, she came back and asked him to give it to her, but he refused to do so. Thereupon she promised him that he should be made master of his trade wherever his lot should fall without serving further apprenticeship. On that condition, he gave her the belt, and rising early next morning, he went to the yard where the boat was a building and put in 2 planks so perfectly that when his master arrived and saw them, he said to him, "Are you aware of anybody being in the building yard last night? For I see by the work done that I am more likely to be an apprentice to that person than who put in those 2 planks, whoever he is. Was it you that did it?" The reply was in the affirmative, and the apprentice told his master the circumstances under which he gained the rapid mastership of his trade.
So she offered him the mastership of the trade to give her her belt back.
Yeah, because she came and asked him. So this is another common thread in the story, that if you can manage to steal an article of their clothing, like so as opposed to giving them some article of clothing, if you can manage to get one of them, like the hat or the belt, then not only can you pass amongst them unmolested and undamaged and not blinded and all that kind of stuff, but if they demand it back or they ask it back from you, you have to give it willingly. And so if you refuse, they will offer you all kinds of stuff. In order, the stories will say, they come and ask for the belt, and you just say, "No, I'm not going to give it to you." And they'll be like, "Oh, I'll give you all this." And you give them the belt, and they give you that thing, whatever it is.
I keep the belt.
I keep the belt.
It's like the Deathly
belt's mine.
Hallows. Again, Harry Potter, right?
Right.
Like the Deathly Hallows allows, like the cloak, allows him to pass
Right.
before death without being
So
harmed.
it depends on what you want. And so the person in this story found it far more, he didn't want to be able to pass amongst the fairies unmolested.
Yeah.
He wanted to be master of the carpentry.
But see, if you gain something like that, then that's the thing that you want to pass down to your children. Is don't ever...
Yeah. Don't ever give this belt
Give this
away.
away.
And then, of course, in the story, the grandson gives the belt away for nothing or
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah. It's just, there's stories like that too.
But might give it to somebody who knew what it was.
Yeah. Okay. Marianne MacLean of Barra and her testimony. Our next...
Like Voldemort. No!
No! Our next witness to testify is a direct descendant of the ancient MacNeils of Barra. Her name now is Marianne MacLean, but she lives in the mountainous center of Barra at Upper Borv. She is many years younger than the men who have testified, and one of the most industrious women on the island. It was already dark and past dinner time when we entered her cottage, and so, as we sat down before a blazing peat fire, she at once offered us some hot milk and biscuits, which we were only too glad to accept. And as we ate, we talked first about our hard climb in the darkness across the mountains and through the thick heather bushes, and then about the big rock which has a keyhole in it. This is why I wanted to read this. A big rock which has a keyhole in it, for it contains a secret entrance to a fairy palace. We had examined it in the twilight as we came through the mountain to pass, which it guards, and my guide Michael assured me that more than one islander crossing at the hour we were had seen some of the fairies near it. We waited in front of the big rock in hopes one might appear for our benefit, but in spite of our strong belief that the fairies were there, not a single one would come out. Perhaps they came and we couldn't see them. Who knows? A rock with a keyhole in it. I think that's...
Yeah, so they were basically standing by the door, just like, nope. Oh, nope, there's no secret here.
Yeah, and the guy was like, "You know what? If we don't leave, we might get taken." And
Hell no.
all right. My father and grandfather knew a man who was carried by the hosts from South Uistir to Barra. I understand when the hosts take away earthly men, they require another man to help them. See, this is interesting. But the hosts must be spirits. My opinion is that they are both spirits of the dead and other spirits of not dead people. A child was taken by the hosts and returned after one night and one day, and found at the back of the house with the palms of its hands in the holes in the wall and no life in its body.
What?
They found the kid with his hands stuck in holes in the wall, hanging there from the wall at the back of the house, dead, after having disappeared. Strange story. It was dead in spirit. It is believed that when people are dropped from a great height by the host, they are killed by the fall. As to fairies, my firm opinion is that they are spirits who appear in the shape of human beings. Oh yeah, I just had stopped that, so yeah, I don't know which way it was. Okay, abduction of a bridegroom. I have heard it from old people that a couple newly married were on their way to the home of the bride's father, and for some unknown reason the groom fell behind the procession and, seeing a fairy dwelling open along the road, was taken into it. No one could ever find the least trace of where he went, and all hope of seeing him again was given up. The man remained with the fairies so long that when he returned, 2 generations had disappeared during the lapse of time. The township in which his bride's house used to be was depopulated and in ruins for upwards of 20 years. But to him, the time had just seemed only a few hours, and he was just as fresh and youthful as when he went in the fairy dwelling. So, like, he vanishes, 2 generations go by, and the town where the house was they were actually going to is completely in ruins and had been for over 20 years when he returned, and he looked exactly the same as he had when he disappeared. So this makes me wonder, like, how many people that are getting 411 are going to appear 100 years from now looking exactly the same as they did.
Oh, dude, that's crazy.
You know what I'm saying? It's craziness.
That is a really cool idea.
Okay. So this is an excerpt of what he recorded from something that he found that was from even more ancient writings. So these people were talking in the 1800s or so, and he was just putting this in the book. He says the people, or what he was putting in there that he was reading in these writings, the people of those times were full of music and dancing and stories and traditions. So these people, more than 100 years before this guy was writing this book, are talking about even more ancient people. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The people of those times were full of music and dancing stories and traditions. The clerics have extinguished these. May ill befall them. And what have the clerics put in their place? Belief about creeds and disputations about denominations and churches. It is they who have put the cross round the heads and the entanglements around the feet of the people. The people of Gaeldom of today are near perishing for lack of the famous feats of their fathers. The clerics have suppressed every noble custom among the people of Gaeldom, precious customs that will never return, never again. So this is not everybody thought this way, but this is how some of the ancient Gaelic people thought of what they thought Christianity was doing to the traditions of their fathers and their fathers' fathers and their fathers' 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 fathers. Yeah. That they were losing them never to return. But I think that's what happens to every civilization. You just lose stuff, and you don't, like, things that are in the social context are just lost. You know, people 100 years from now are going to read about social things that happen today and not understand them at all.
Yep.
And not have the context. So, and yet there are some things that survive across all of these ages that we still understand. Like the story of Gilgamesh has stuff in it that we still think is badass. Yeah. Because there's certain things. But again, as you're reading it, the stuff you don't understand probably is socially contexted in the age in which it was written. Right? The following prayer, surviving to our own epoch, is most interesting. It shows, in fact, pure paganism, and we may judge from it that the ancient Manx people regarded Manannán, the great Tuatha De Danann god, in his true nature as a spiritual being, a lord of the sea, Enki, and as belonging to the complex fairy hierarchy. This prayer was given to me by a Manx woman nearly 100 years old, who is still living. She said it had been used by her grandfather, and that her father prayed the same prayer, substituting St. Patrick's name for Manannán's. And then the prayer is given in Gaelic, which I'm not even going to try to read. But the translation is, Manannán, son of Lear, who blessed our island, bless us and our boat while going out, and better coming in with living and dead fish in the boat. That was the prayer. That's a strange translation of this prayer, right?
Yeah.
It seems to me that no one of the various theories so far advanced accounts in and itself for the fairy faith. There is always a missing factor, an unknown quantity which has yet to be discovered. No doubt the pygmy theory explains a good deal. So pygmy theory is, does he explain this here? The pygmy theory, yeah, okay. In some countries, a tradition has been handed down of the times when there were races of diminutive men in existence, being so small that their tiny hands could have used the flint arrowheads and scrapers which are like toys to us. No such tradition exists at the present day in the Isle of Man, but one might have filtered down from the far-off ages and become innate in the folk memory, and now, unknown to the Manx peasant, may possibly suggest to his mind the troops of the little people in the shadowy glen or on the lonely mountainside. Again, the rustling of the leaves or the sigh of the wind may be heard by the peasant as a strange and mysterious voice, or the trembling shadow of a bush may appear to him as an unearthly being. Natural facts explainable by modern science may easily remain dark mysteries to those who live quiet lives close to nature, far from sophisticated towns, and whose few years of schooling have left the depths of their being undisturbed, only, as it were, ruffling the shallows. But, so that he gives us the sculptard explanation right there, but then he says, but this is not enough. Even let it be granted that 9 out of every 10 cases of experiences with fairies can be analyzed and explained away by science. There remains this 10th. In this 10th case, one is obliged to admit that there is something at work which we do not understand, some force in play which, as yet, we know not. In spite of ourselves, we feel there's powers that's in. These powers are not necessarily what the superstitious call supernatural. We realize now that there is nothing supernatural, so it is, that what used to be so-called is simply something we do not understand at present. Our forefathers would have thought the telephone, the X-rays, wireless telegraphy, things of supernatural. It is more than possible that our descendants may make discoveries equally marvelous in the realms of both mind and matter, and that many things which nowadays seem to be the materialistically minded the creations of credulous fancy, may in the future be understood and recognized as part of the one great scheme of things. Some persons are certainly more susceptible than others to these unknown forces. Most people know reliable instances of telepathy and presentiment amongst their acquaintances. It seems not at all contrary to reason that both matter and mind, in knowledge of which we have not yet gone very far after all, may exist in forms as yet entirely unknown to us. After all, beings with bodies and personalities different from our own may well inhabit the unseen world around us. The fairy hound, white as driven snow, may show himself at times amongst his mundane companions. Fenodree may do the farm work for those whom he favors, and the little people may sing and dance in nights in the Colby Glen. Let us not say that it is impossible.
Dude, that's freaking awesome. I love that. That's great.
Yeah, so I think we'll stop there with the reading. We got a little time left to do some discussing. I think that he's exactly right. And this is kind of that whole thing that I just read in a sort of archaic way is saying what we say on this show all the time.
Yeah.
Right? That we don't know everything. We do not actually have the Manual for How the Universe Works Final Edition.
Yeah.
And people who pretend that we do are the ones that claim that things like this are ridiculous.
Yeah.
Right? But it's them being ridiculous, because what you actually see when you look at the entirety of human knowledge, all that shows you is how much we don't know.
Yeah. And it's true that a lot of these things can be explained. Like when there's so many stories or strange things that you think, or that people might say happen, and you're like, oh, well, there's actually a perfectly reasonable, quote unquote, reasonable explanation for that. But then there's occasionally one where you're just like, what?
Right. Like that soundbite we played from a couple of episodes back from the general who was talking about UFO reports.
Yeah.
That there's this small percentage of relatively incredible things
that they
from
cannot
very credible
explain.
people that cannot be explained, and that's what we focus on.
Yeah.
It's the same with this. Right? That 9 out of 10 of these can be explained, but there is in those 10th stories, it shows us that there's something here that we don't understand, that people are interacting with in some way, some part of the natural world. It's not supernatural, because all that word is actually subjective. Supernatural is just anything we don't understand.
Right.
You know, like you have to say
whatever happens is natural.
Right.
So if that's happening, it's natural.
Right. That's why the great sages say, what is.
Yeah, it's part of nature. The nature of the
Right.
universe.
In other words, supernatural is not a real thing.
Right.
This is a word that has been put on things by materialists who are using the Manual for How the Universe Works Final Edition in order to make it seem ridiculous.
Yeah.
Right? Supernatural. There's no such thing as supernatural.
Yeah.
Whatever happens is natural. Whether we're doing it or something else is doing it or whatever, it is part of the universe. The universe meaning, that word actually meaning everything.
Right. So, yeah. So that actually may be a better way to sort of come together with people who are quote unquote materialists, because really what they really are like. Because I guess if there was a different type of material that makes up the spirit realm, whatever bodies they have in the spirit realm is just a different material.
Yeah.
It's not material in the sense that of this realm.
Right.
So I'm basically saying the same thing. Like you can get rid of the idea of supernatural, which is obviously not true. Because
Right. And you can get rid of the idea of material if we don't understand all the nature of all material.
Right.
In the universe, which would be everything. No matter what. Yeah.
What plane or what.
What realm of existence. You know, if this thing that we think of as the material universe is a tiny island inside of a much greater set of existences, and all of those contain their own forces and materials.
And very nice people.
Yeah, and very nice people, the good folk. Yeah, so I think that's a very that's a good note to close this show out on. Basically,
man, I had a really good question that I was saving, and I can't remember what it is. So I'll have to listen to the show and then write it down.
And then
I'll ask you next week
in episode 72.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. Yep. All right. I think that's it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you guys very much. Be careful of the Fae, because they're
very nice.
They're very nice people. Not at the Sons of Adam. Which means get back to work, Adamu. You are the Sons of Adam and the Sons of Abraham.
Get back to work.
Get back to work. Get that gold. Go. Fairies making me not be able to talk.